What's going on, everybody? I see people jumping in. Okay. I see Jonathan in here bringing them on. I'm Justin. I'm with Uncle Bobby's. Welcome to a special conversation. We're talking hip hop at 50 with author Jonathan Abrams, who wrote The Come Up, an oral history on the rise of hip hop, with hip hop celebrating its 50th birthday. This is no better time to have a conversation about hip hop music, hip hop culture, and everything. Just saw Jonathan, his request. I'm trying to bring him on. Looks like he's having a little bit of trouble. Let's see. Jonathan,
Hey, what's up, my man?
what's going on? How you doing?
Good. Sorry, I'm just waiting to catch a plane, so I got to the airport a little early to hop on with you.
No problem. I appreciate you making time for us. I know it's been a busy month for you with all the hip hop at 50 celebrations. I'm sure you're in high demand. So thank you for making time for Uncle Bobby's and all of us.
Man, it was an honor. When I saw that request, I was like, man, gotta do it. Gotta hop on.
So like, I know you're short on time, so I want to jump right into it. I love The Come Up. It was one of my favorite reads last year. And the first thing that jumps out is the fact that it's an oral history. And this is your second book that you wrote as an oral history. The other book is about the TV show The Wire. And if you're a fan of The Wire, you got to pick that up. You got to read that, as a companion piece to a rewatch, whatever you got to do. But Jonathan, why select oral histories as your kind of like format to tell the story?
They they can be tough to do. I think when oral histories are done right, they're almost like people are sitting in a room conversating, and their reflections and recollections are playing off of one another. So to me, doing something with hip hop and trying to talk about all these great formative moments, having an oral history was something that worked in my head.
That makes sense. So one of the things that jumped out, and you kind of mentioned in the introduction, was that, where you having people tell stories of things that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago, and, you're relying on people's memories. And with so many things that just kind of happened in rooms, whether it was a nightclub, whether it was a particular studio, whether it was someone's basement, how did you deal with, making sure that this actually happened the way they said it versus someone that said, nah, man, KRS was the one that stole my rhyme book. You know what I'm saying? Like, how
That's a
did you
great
tell
thing,
the difference?
especially because like if you think about hip hop and how it started, like especially at the beginning, none of this stuff was being documented. People didn't really think that the thing was gonna last 5 years, let alone we're celebrating the 50-year anniversary. And that if memories conflict, which 30, 40, 50 years they often do, it would be interesting to almost have an argument within the pages of people saying this happened, no, this happened. And I remember one of those things was Professor Griff talking about when Russell Simmons first listened to Public Enemy's demo, and he was adamant that it got tossed out the window. And of course, nobody's going to say that they heard Public Enemy and tossed the tape out the window. So having them go back and forth in the pages was interesting in my opinion. And it's almost like you just let the reader decide.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of it. I mean, I feel like if you feel like your demo tape was thrown out the window, it might have happened because the
Yeah,
throw of the demo tape probably threw a lot of them out the window.
yeah, that's not something you just make up, right?
Yeah, you only got one demo tape that you sent in. You probably know exactly what happened to it. Of all the people that you got to interview, what was like the most fun interview? What was like man, I can't believe I'm talking to this person.
Uh, I had a few of those. one, just growing up on the West Coast, talking about to Ice Cube about his path and his impact was really amazing. But as far as the interview that stayed with me the most, I would say Cool Mo D. And he's just somebody who's touched hip hop in so many different ways throughout the years. He was there at the beginning with the Treacherous Three. He came up and was battling people. Battled LL Cool J. That beat may still be going on. uh, but he talked about boycotting or not boycotting the Grammys back in '88 when everybody else did it. Def Jam did it, but he talked about his perspective from it. He talked about how there was almost a split in hip hop once NWA came up against Public Enemy and what it was like from his perspective, and just seeing it grow from the beginning to what it is now. I just thought he had a really really circular perspective on the whole genre.
Yeah, no, I thought that the Mo D story about the Grammys was interesting because it was kind of like he felt like they didn't, he didn't get the memo about what everyone was doing, and he was like, "Man, I didn't mean to be the person perceived to be the sellout. Like y'all to let me know, I'd have been on,
Yeah,
with y'all."
it was that, and then he was also like, we should have had this conversation too. If we're having this argument about hip hop not getting its proper due, then let's have that argument. But let's also, you know, get the mic and be able to take this stand and tell people and show people what hip hop is all about. Was his whole thing.
Right. No. And there's obviously arguments for that. I mean, I can't believe it's the same person, right? But Kanye did take the mic and go at the president of the United States in front of national television, right? Which is essentially what Mo D was saying should have been done in the 80s, right? And Grammy
That was a few years ago.
It was several yays. Yeah, it was it was several yays. Obviously not counting folks who were no longer with us, but or maybe that too. But who's someone that you weren't able to interview that you wish that you could have for this book?
I mean, there was a lot, but some of the icons and the really almost Mount Rushmore people in hip hop story. They have documentaries. They have their own books. Like it would have been awesome to sit down with Nas and pick his brain, yeah, of course, but that wasn't going to happen. But at the same time, it was good for me to be able to shed some light on people whose stories aren't as well known. So somebody like Duke Booty, who he passed away shortly after I talked to him, unfortunately, but he, helped write and did a lot of the music for The Message, which was, a foundational song in hip hop, or talking to MC Shaw Rock, one of the first female MCs, being able to spread their stories meant a lot to me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I get that, right? Because I mean, for some of the Mount Rushmore people, we've heard their stories, we kind of know their tales, and they've told it themselves. But to be able to use this platform to shine a light on so many other people that we're not super familiar with, because even talking about Nas out of Queensbridge, I mean, you spend a lot of time talking about Marley Marl and his, impact on just how the music composition and how like samples, would not have happened largely without what he did. So I think stuff like that is super important for us to know. You did mention, and one thing that was interesting to me, and you mentioned that you're from the West Coast. I'm actually from the East Coast. I got the Illmatic t-shirt on. I'm from Queens. One of the things that jumped out with me with the book was how hip hop just kind of like was like an atomic bomb, and it just kind of blew up all over the country. And from a East Coast kid, I kind of thought it was like all New York. Then we had like Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre and Outkast and all that, like in the late 80s, in the late 80s, early 90s. But in your book, it's clear that starting in the early 80s, hip hop was kind of everywhere. So can you speak a little bit about why do you think this thing became viral before viral was a thing? Like, how did this thing become the thing that went to every hood and every corner of the United States?
I think it's a big reason why hip hop is so popular and why it still resonates now is that it's authentic, right? It comes from us, and the younger generation is always going to be at the forefront, pushing it forward and propelling it forward. So if you look back to it, back in the early '80s, we were really looking for a sound for us, and that's the thing that started. And it's funny talking about how hip hop spread. It originally spread a lot through Black people being on army bases and taking cassette tapes with them on the bases across the world. And that's how it originally spread a lot. I don't know how much people really realize that. And then they had overseas exhibitions where people got to see breakdancing and DJing for the first time. And that was, a great experience for a lot of the early DJs to actually learn and see it for the first time.
Yeah, the army base thing was something I had no idea about, and that was definitely a cool fact to know. And obviously, the one that we all kind of know is, Rappers Delight, right? It seems like once that got on the radio, it was over, right? It was just like if you had access to a radio, or if your older brother heard it, that is also like the moment where people all around the country say, "Oh my God, what is this thing? I need to know more about it." Is is there like is there another song or another artist or another kind of, like you said, we had the army bases, we got rappers. Like, is there another kind of seminal moment that you think we need to shine some light on? It's like, hip hop wouldn't be as big if it wasn't for this thing that happened.
Yeah, I think, I mentioned it briefly before, but the message was definitely one. Grandmaster Flash and Furious Five. Before that, that came out in 1982, and Rapper's Delight came out in 1978. And after Rapper's Delight came out, a lot of hip hop was really party music, right? It was to get the party going. I think the message really showed its societal impact in talking about conditions, urban conditions for the first time. It wasn't this uplifting song that you dance to, but it showed hip hop's potential, and it laid the groundwork for a group like Public Enemy to come up after the message.
Dope. Yeah. Um, so obviously, I think you and I are probably 80s babies or roughly around the same age. So, you feel like you know so much about it because you grew up in it. Did you, while you were working on this book and talking to so many people, did you have like an oh wow moment? Like I had no idea. Was there anything that just kind of blew your mind as to, what you learned about hip hop?
Oh yeah, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this book, because I felt like I knew a lot, but at the same time there was so much more to learn. And you know, I think learning about the birth of it and really trying to figure that out, because not a lot of it is was documented, as we mentioned earlier, was something that really resonated. And it's also just seeing how much hip hop is spread globally. Like I called it the book to come up for a reason, and it's because hip hop, it started as just as something for really black people and Puerto Rican kids at the time to have something to build themselves upon, something to have self-esteem, something for them to do. You look at the Bronx at that time in the early to mid 1970s, and school funds are being cut, and everybody's saying the Bronx is burning, and these are latchkey kids not with not a lot to do, and they find hip hop, and they go to this new developing art form, and it's not just obviously lyricism at that point. It's all the facets. It's breakdancing, it's graffiti, it's DJing, and all of it coalesces into this multifaceted gem that really catches on. And they weren't doing it especially for the money back then. They were doing it for something for themselves. And to see it grow and blossom and flourish across the globe has been the greatest come up that I think that anybody could possibly imagine.
100%. I remember it when I read the part in the book where you mentioned how they used to hot wire the street lamps so that they could power the equipment to do the parties. And I'm just thinking about these kids who are not master electricians, they can't get into the union, figured out how to hotwire, a street lamp so they can get these parties off. And just the
Exactly.
ingenuity from day one through now about, the people that are involved in hip hop was something that blew me away for sure.
And these are all young kids, right? Because the older kids, the kids who have money, they're going downtown New York for the discos that are really popular, and they're looking down on hip hop coming up, saying that it's just going to be a fad, and you're not even playing your own music, and this thing isn't going to last.
Yeah, it's amazing. And can you speak a little bit about the importance of community? Because I think in mainstream media and in white supremacist media, and a lot of this, the idea of the black community as this fractured thing, and we're never united and this all other thing. But I think in this book, one thing that stands out is that black spaces, black community, like beauty can come out of that, whether it's the skating rinks, some other, avenue that's black owned, black controlled, a lot of this flourish within the Black community spaces. So can you talk a little bit like what you learned about that, the importance of community?
Yeah, when you were saying that, the quote that came into my head was Bun B, and it was toward the end of the book. Traditionally, he said that church was that black space and that black community that served as a hub, and it still does a lot. But along that arm, I think hip hop serves as a community for so many people to unite and have something to aspire for, to practice for, to learn from, to be inspired by. And I think that hip hop still serves that purpose.
For sure, 100%. In a similar fashion, just in terms of importance and being like critical to the success of hip hop, women is all through your book, and I think there's a ton of women that we're familiar with, tons of women we're not familiar with that's in this book. So, can you speak a little bit about the importance that women, specifically Black women, have had on this billion-dollar, right, this multinational culture and music?
Yeah, I think, like I said at the beginning, the NC Shot Rock and being able to talk about her, some of my book was something that was special to me. And then you look at, I think there's almost a misnomer that in the 80s, late 80s during the golden era, that it was, all about KRS-One and Chuck D and Kim really elevating lyricism. But if you look at the women during that period, Salt and Pepper and NC Light and Queen Latifah and what they were doing, they were still holding their own and elevating lyricism above and beyond. And I think that's still the case. You look at the 90s with Lauryn Hill and Missy Elliott, and now today there's so many wonderful female rappers that you can't tell the story of hip hop without women. And there's somebody like Sylvia Rowan on the executive side who have been pushing forward hip hop since almost the beginning.
For sure. Yeah, there's so many people that, like you said, behind the scenes that saw the talent in Nas or Public Enemy, and it was like, I'm going to make sure you get this record deal. I'm going to make sure you get this album pressed out and released. And for sure, hip hop is not even a thing without the contributions of women, for sure. What would you say? What's
Sorry, I can see on your face a tough question is coming.
No, it's because like you wrote so much, right? It's such a dense text, but I think it's so important because there's so much history. So I kind of wanted to, give the people a little bit like a little deeper dive. What would you say is like the song or the album that doesn't get enough credit for being a pillar in hip hop or being, a rock or on the Mount Rushmore, say?
Hmm, that's a tough question. I mean, I may have to think about it a little bit because I think there's a lot. You know, no album comes out specifically, but I don't know if Busta Rhymes gets the love he deserves for all the ingenuity that he's brought forth in hip hop. Uh, I think a lot of the Boogie Down Productions album where uh, they got everybody together after Scott LaRock's death. I think that was a pivotal moment in hip hop. There's, I mean, there's a lot. It's tough to name off the head like
No,
that.
I got you. I mean, the song I had in mind when I thought about that question was actually the Trigger Man song, right? Because as an East Coast kid, as a New York kid, it was like a lot of tunnel vision. It was just like it was New York and then everything else. But learning that this one song that was created by this one person was basically the foundation for almost all the Southern music we love today that we dance to, and it was just really cool just learning, just learning about just how the ingenuity and the creativity just was all throughout the country. Like you just had these Black people all over the country just creating, and not, like you said, not for the money, not for necessarily the clout, just doing it because they loved it, and it turned into this thing. So that song, always, and the fact that Bun B rapped it in the Big Pimpin' song, but I had no idea what he was talking about. You know what I mean? At the end of that verse, but after reading the book, I'm like, wait, is that the song Bun B was talking? Is that what Bun B was talking about on Big Pimpin'? And that's what he was talking about. You know what I mean? Because that was the song that got the South popping.
It is. Going back and doing a lot of the research on production and being able to talk to somebody like Marley, Just Blaze, Salam Remy, just amazing producers. That was an aspect of hip hop that I certainly didn't know a lot heading into this project. But I'm really grateful because, just being somebody who growing up, you pay attention to the lyrics probably more so than the actual production, and learning the intricacies and everything that goes into that and its evolution was something that was special to me to be able to learn.
Yeah, and in line of that, since we both grew up with hip hop, we growth, and I think it's part of our DNA in a way. But we're adults now. There's a lot of things that we see the world differently now than we did in the '90s. While working on the book, while reflecting on hip hop at 50, how do you reflect on the last 50 years, the last 50 years of hip hop as an adult versus maybe how you saw hip hop when you were a kid?
I think as a kid, I was listening to a lot of the West Coast gangster rap, and to be honest, I still bump that now. Do I take the lyrics as seriously? Obviously not. But I grew up in one of those households where my mom was like, "Don't play that hippity hop, or don't have it, don't have that stuff in our house," to where I'd have to hide any CD that had a parental advisory sticker on it. And I remember one time my mom found it, and I had to go back to Radio Shack or Circuit City or whatever it was, and return my Tupac CD. But after she read this book, and then she was like, "Jonathan, I get it now. Like, it was something that I didn't get, when you were younger, but after reading this and seeing his impact, it's something that I get now." And I think that's the story, or one of the many stories of hip hop, is that it has the power to be transformative. And I think my mom is probably like a lot of black people from the generation above us who probably saw hip hop surface level when it originally came out, but who has hopefully come up to appreciate it at this point.
For sure. And I think if you want another idea for a follow-up book to this, you can write an oral history of kids whose mom and dads threw out their music 1988 and 2000. Like, I had an older homeboy who had all the tapes, and he used to put on the Maxell 90s, so I would have it. I wouldn't have to worry about parental advisory because it was just the title on there. And I remember I had Mobb Deep's The Infamous. That was the first official cassette tape I had. And thankfully, the left corner where the parental advisory sticker was black, so I took the Sharpie out, and I covered over the white part of the parental advisory so you couldn't see it unless you looked real.
Man, it was like I had contraband.
Yeah. That's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it was. And I got caught actually playing Tupac's Hit 'Em Up at the house one time. It was not fantastic that evening.
Talk about a song to play.
Yeah, I didn't think she was home, or I don't think she could hear it. I don't know what happened. I might have been dubbing it. I don't know what I was doing, but it was on. I tried to stop it. It didn't happen, and then there was a conversation. So that that was a day for sure. I got two more questions for you because I know you got to roll. Thinking about reflection, and I know a big inspiration for you writing this book was Tupac. And, there's been, a bit of a resurgence with the Dear Mama documentary that came out. And at least with me, as I also grew up a Tupac fan, the way I view Tupac at 41 versus when he died and I was 14, right? Like, I see things a lot differently. Like, how do you view Tupac and his legacy now as a grown man who's written this book versus when you were just enjoying the music when you were a kid?
Well, so he was 12 I was 12 when he died. And you think of somebody who dies that young, and when you're that age, you still think that they're old, right? And to know that he accomplished so much now, being able to look back and reflect on that, and to have the type of worldwide perspective to be so far ahead of his time with his lyrics and a lot of his messages, to me is just amazing. To be able to speak about stuff that is still impacting and affecting us now, and to be able to say it as poignantly as he did at the age he did, is just remarkable to me.
For sure. And I think what jumped out with the documentary was realizing that the time when he got shot in New York, and then when he passed was like 2 years. And all of that stuff that happened in my young mind felt like it happened over a decade, but it happened in like 2 years. Like all of that stuff. Me Against the World. He goes to prison. He gets out. Death Row. Vegas. It's over. And it's like, you know what I mean? This whirlwind period.
And I know if you're, we're the same age, that you were thinking and hoping that he was somewhere in Jamaica for years, just because he came out with so much new music for so long. And I was like, hey, he's not dead.
Yeah, that was a crazy time. It was a crazy time. And I think what I reflect on as an adult now was, like you said, how young he was, but also like he was just a kid, right? Like and he made real stupid mistakes the same way any 24, 25-year-old would make. But you weren't given that kind of grace. Like, well, Black people aren't given that kind of grace, period. But if you're public and you're mouthy or whatever, you're definitely not given grace. But it's like, he was just getting started, like Biggie was, like so many of these other folks are just getting started.
Just getting started.
But we view them as these adults when you're young. My last question before you head off to your next destination is, we're at 50 years. Rather than say try to predict the future, I would like to say, what would you like the next 50 years of hip hop music and culture to be?
I think we're at 50 and we think of hip hop being this thing that's still fully formed, but if you look at other musical genres that've been around for so much longer. So I would like to see it still keep developing, still keep being at the forefront of culture and our culture, and I think it will be. It's not the hip hop that I grew up on that's most popular right now, but I can understand that classics are being made that my kids will love and listen to and be bumping years from now, and that's what'll keep hip hop relevant, is that it'll keep staying young.
That's super dope. And that's how I see it too. I know I'm an old head. I know these folks ain't making music for me, but I feel like I can see myself in them when they are enjoying these artists. It reminds me of how I was when I first saw Nas' It Ain't Hard to Tell video. And I would never want to steal their joy just because it sounds a little bit different than what it sounded like to me in the 90s.
Yeah, that's my perspective. As long as Nas, keeps coming out with all these albums, I'm good.
For sure. And it's good, right? It's good because a lot of the OGs that you interviewed from the 70s and 80s, they're not making music, and they didn't have that long runway, right? The same way that some of these rappers that kind of started in the 90s are starting to be able to extend their careers a bit longer. So that is really cool to see that, that with the growth of hip hop culture, we are expanding, some of the careers that, were so important to us. So that's super dope.
I would love to see a hip hop artist get a Vegas residency at some point, and have love being shown that way, because we haven't seen too many 6-year-old artists be able to be celebrated like that, and how people are in other musical genres.
For sure. I mean, it's coming. I feel like, I don't know, after this Usher thing, we might be 18 months away from Snoop Dogg doing a Vegas residency.
That'll probably be the first.
Yeah, with just low riders on the stage and riding his bicycle all around. That's I feel like that's coming. Just bringing out all the special guests. We definitely a little bit away from Snoop. Snoop is everywhere, so we definitely can see that happening. But Jonathan, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk about hip hop. Again, this was a treat for me. I love the book. I feel like I've been waiting for people our age to take control of the narrative about hip hop music and culture. I feel like as we were growing up, we were being told how negative this was, and we were being told all the other things about hip hop, and we knew it wasn't true. We knew there was the beauty, the ingenuity, the creativity, and I was waiting for the authors and the griots to be able to tell the story of hip hop in the right way. So I thank you for what you're bringing to the culture. It's super important.
That means the world to me. I gotta visit y'all in person at some point.
Oh, for sure. Let us know. We'll have some in stock so you can sign. But I appreciate y'all, folks. The book is to come up, An Oral History on the Rise of Hip Hop. That is Jonathan Abrams. I appreciate you joining us, and we will talk soon.
Sounds good. Have a good one.
All right, peace.